Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm your host with no name, and today we are looking at Season 2, Episode 12, The Bounty Hunter. This episode was shot at the end of October 1971, and it aired December 9th, 1971. The story was by Roy Huggins, and the teleplay was by Nicholas E. Baer. Baer had previously written Something to Get Hung About, and he will go on to write about 4 more episodes before the series ends. The episode was directed by Barry Shear. We know him well by this point, but sadly, this is his last time in the director's chair for this show. Everybody applaud Mr. Shear and thank him for his contributions. This episode guest stars Louis Gossett Jr., credited in this episode as Lou Gossett. He plays Joe Sims. This is the only black person you will ever see on Alias Smith & Jones. And that's not great. I believe this episode's heart was in the right place, but it just kind of falls a little flat when there are no other black characters on this show at all, or if there are, they are so inconsequential that I can't remember them. I get that this is the early 70s, but by this point, Star Trek had already been on the air, Julia had already been on the air, Mannix was airing at the time, and Gail Fisher had won an Emmy for her role on that series. I Spy had already been on the air, trigger warning for Bill Cosby, but he had won multiple Emmys by that point. Eartha Kitt had already played Catwoman. Progress on television was being made. It wasn't perfect, and hell, it is still not perfect. But the point is, I'm not going to give ASJ too much credit for this episode. Anyway, back to Louis Gossett Jr. Like Sally Field, I'm sure I don't need to tell you who he is. He's an Oscar and Emmy award-winning actor, and he's still working today. He was just in the Watchmen series from a couple of years ago. According to IMDb, he was originally meant to play Gale Sayers in Brian's Song, but he had an injury that prevented him from shooting the movie, and the producer, David L. Walper, promised him the next great role that came along. For him, that turned out to be Fiddler in Roots, for which he won his Primetime Emmy. I mostly know him from Enemy Mine, which is a really cool sci-fi movie from the 1980s. If you ever wanted to see Louis Gossett Jr. give birth, boy, is this the movie for you! I also know him from Diggstown and Toy Soldiers. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't actually seen An Officer and a Gentleman. I'm so sorry. The point is, he's one hell of an accomplished person, and ASJ was lucky to have him. The other guest stars have very minor roles, but there's a couple I want to highlight. R.G. Armstrong plays Max. According to IMDb, again, take that with a grain of salt, he was besties with Andy Griffith. That's cool. He was a graduate of the Lee Strasberg Actors Studio, so I guess that means he was a big believer in the method. Whatever works for you. He was in some high-profile movies like Predator, Dick Tracy, Children of the Corn, El Dorado, and Ride the High Country. For television, he was on one short-lived series called The Cat. He also had a recurring role on Friday the 13th, the series. Technically, he was on an episode of Starsky and Hutch, but that episode was Huggy Bear and the Turkey, which doesn't count. We don't speak of it. He was on Marcus Welby, The Invaders, Here Come the Brides, The Time Tunnel, Gunsmoke, Rawhide, Maverick, and, of course, The Andy Griffith Show. He passed away in 2012 at age 95. And Jeffrey Lewis. Since he's already been on one episode, Stagecoach 7, and he will be in one more in Season 3, I won't go into it again. I only bring him up because I like him. Story about this episode. Pete Duell kept showing up about 30 minutes late during shooting for no particular reason. At least, according to Joe Swerling, he had no particular excuse. Swerling had a talk with him about it and told him that he was keeping Ben, Lewis, and the whole crew waiting on him, and they're going to start getting pissed. Apparently, it hadn't occurred to Pete that he was fostering resentment, so from then on, he showed up on time. But that's not all. In response to Pete's tardiness, Ben started showing up late too. But Ben had an excuse that amazed both Joe Swerling and myself. Ben said, quote, "Well, I kinda have to do it, because Peter's going to come in late, and if I come in on time, I start resenting Peter. If that begins to fester, I'm not a good enough actor to be able to turn that off when the camera rolls. And my fear is that if I'm mad at Peter, it's going to come across on screen, and it's going to screw up this wonderful thing we have going, and it'll hurt the show. So I figure out how late he's going to be, and then I'll come in 10 minutes before he does, but I'll still be late." End quote. Ben, your mind. I'm fascinated by it. Truly, that is a level of forethought and self-awareness that I am impressed by. Swerling said, quote, "You know, that was one of the smartest excuses I ever got. I had nowhere to go." End quote. I can think of no good segue from there, so let's just get into it, shall we? We do have a sneak peek. Hayes and Kid are tied up on their horses, being led along by a few men, while Hayes does his best to spin a tale about how they most certainly are not Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry, thank you very much, how very dare you. They've got families, they've got weddings and such. His wife is a great cook. And the only response they get is, will you shut up? And theme song. Back before all that happened, Hayes and Kid are riding along in the desert, minding their own business. Kid wants to know how much money they have left. Hayes tries to wax poetic about the scenery and the sky and how the best things in life are free. But Kid's got no time for this. How much? $2.16. Damn. Hayes, we're 3 minutes in and already your silver tongue has failed you twice. And the Kid agrees with me. Hayes is offended that Kid is losing confidence in him. As they bicker, the titular bounty hunter pulls a shotgun on them from behind a boulder. He expertly gets them off their horses and relieved of their guns. Like, he's got this down to a science. Once both boys are face down and unarmed, the bounty hunter emerges on his horse. They ask who he is, and he introduces himself as Joe Sims, and that they are under arrest. He's a bounty hunter. Professional. He figured out from doing some thorough checking that they are Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry. He has Hayes tie Kid's hand behind his back. Then he pulls him to his feet. Then he instructs Hayes to wrap his arms around the Kid in a bear hug so that Joe can tie Hayes' hands. Hayes looks so put out, it is hilarious. Like, there's just this long shot of them looking at each other, faces inches apart, and then looking away, and then looking back, and it's just really funny. Oh, and Joe puts Kid's hat back on him for him. That's cute. Once they're both tied up, Joe lets them know that he doesn't care if he brings them in dead or alive because it makes no difference for the $20,000. So, which would they rather have it? Alive. They'll take alive, please. It doesn't show Joe helping them onto their horses, but he must. There's no way they could get up there with their hands tied, especially Kid. His hands are behind his back. Anyway, they ride along for a while, and it's really bugging me how Kid is not falling off of his horse. Hayes, maybe. His hands are tied in the front, but really? Whatever. Joe finally tells him that he's taking them to the sheriff in Carbondale. Kid informs him that Carbondale is not the nearest town. Well, the sheriff in the closest town, Hartsville, is a racist and is not going to give Joe any reward money for turning in Hayes and Curry. Kid asks him what makes him so sure the sheriff in Carbondale will be different. Joe says he's not sure, he's just hoping. So we can already see that no matter how good he is at his job, and he's clearly good, he still gets treated like dirt by white people. Not that that's a surprise. Hayes and Kid stubbornly keep referring to each other as Joshua and Thaddeus. That's the thing I love about them. No matter how caught they are, they never lose hope. Now Hayes and Kid start their argument that Joe has made a mistake. Joe's not buying it, not any of it for a second. Any bounty worth more than $2,000 he memorizes and compares to other wanted posters. He knows he's got the right guys. Hayes asks him how he got to be a bounty hunter. Joe tells him that before the war he was a slave, and after the war he started drifting west, farther away from the way it was back where he came from. He says that sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. Depends on what kind of people he runs into. He couldn't find any work that would pay more than room and board. Anything more and he was out of luck. Anyway, he became a bounty hunter for the money so he won't find himself out of luck again. As they ride, Joe's horse is spooked by some stock footage of a rattlesnake and throws him. Hayes and Kid take their chance and hightail it. Again, Kid must have amazing balance not to be falling off his horse. Joe rides after them, not afraid to shoot at them at all. Guess he really meant it when he said dead or alive makes no difference to him. Unfortunately, the boys ride past a group of white guys and one of Joe's bullets finds one of their horses. Once they think they're clear, Hayes jumps down and sort of helps the Kid down. It's ungraceful and they both land in a heap. They manage to untie each other, and Kid brazenly says he'd like to see Joe try that again. The group of white guys surround Joe and call him boy. It's really uncomfortable. They disarm him and do not believe his story about being a bounty hunter. Joe tells him it was an accident about the horse. But the men proceed to be very racist toward him and say stuff that I really don't want to repeat. When Hayes and Kid spot them as they're riding away, they see the group is marching Joe to a lynching. And Hayes can only remark, there goes a budding career. Hayes! Jesus! But Kid, who I knew I could count on, gets his gun out. Hayes looks at him like he's nuts, but Kid says that Joe could have killed him, but he didn't. I don't know, he was shooting at you, but it's fine. He just wants to scare the group off so Joe can get away. And Hayes is like, seriously? We don't owe him anything, and we've got our own problems. Kid does convince him to help. Hayes says they'll fire the 12 shots they're loaded with between them, and then they're out, even if it doesn't help. That's really harsh, Hayes. Like, I get it, he was going to turn you in, but are you really okay with an innocent man getting lynched when you can stop it? Their plan works and the group flees. Hayes and Kid feel good about what they did and keep riding off. Down by the tree, Joe gets himself untied and rides off. Kid crows and repeats Hayes' earlier words about the beautiful scenery and how the best things in life are free. Sadly for them, that's not the only repeat they're going to experience today. Joe's voice rings out and orders them to stop. Kid yells back that they're the ones who scared off the lynch mob. Joe figured as much. Doesn't change shit. We go through the whole ordeal again of getting tied up via bear hug. Hayes reiterates that they just saved his life. And Joe's like, yeah, I heard you the first time. Shut up, Hayes. You were perfectly happy to leave him to die. Joe does admit he doesn't get why they saved him. Seems kind of stupid if he asks him. Hayes gives Kid a look like, see, I told you. On their second ride, Hayes keeps taunting Kid with his own words. Like, oh, we did a good deed. Oh, I'd just like to see him try that again. Joe is amused by their bickering, as am I. Well, wouldn't you know it, here comes another group of white guys. White Group 2.0. They stop them and ask what's going on, because everybody feels the need to stop them because, hey, that's a black guy. Joe explains the situation, but he also has a shotgun at the ready. Hayes is like, I've got a wife and son, and they're sick, and my friend's getting married next week. This gentleman is terribly mistaken about our identities. Joe says no, he knows who he has, and he's turning them in. White Group 2 is like, okay, have a good one. Joe keeps checking behind them as they leave the group behind. White Group 2.0 circle around and cut them off in some trees a while later. He has Joe drop his gun and get off his horse. Sure, they maybe believe his story, and that's why they're going to turn in Hayes and Curry themselves. He orders Joe to walk away. So Joe, unarmed and with no transportation, heads off into the desert. Hayes tries his story again, and we're back at the sneak peek. I love all the little details he adds to this BS story, like Kid's fiancée is the daughter of the mayor of St. Louis. White Group 2.0 says they're going to check out Joe's story because it makes no sense to see a black man riding with two white men tied up in this part of the country. Then, out of nowhere, Joe on a new horse with a new gun gets the jump on the group. One guy gets away, but Joe wounds the other two. And Hayes is like, how the fuck did you do that? Joe says it was easy. They didn't take his money. He walked to a ranch and bought a new horse and a new gun. Got $110 worth of stuff for only $220. Hayes is amazed. Like, you can see he's wondering if even he could have pulled that off. Joe shrugs and says that's what they call free American enterprise. Land of the free, home of the brave. Gossett delivers those lines so well here, I love it. That night, which I'm assuming was shot on a soundstage because it actually looks like night for once, Hayes thinks the guy who got away is going to come back. Joe doesn't think he'll have the guts to show now that he's alone. Kid starts whining that he's hungry. Well, Joe's hungry too. What do you want him to do about it? The other guys whine that their gunshot wounds hurt. Well, what do you want him to do about that? Hayes tells Joe he's going to keep running up against racist white people until he's killed. Joe brushes him off, but then, whoops, the third guy does come back, and he's armed. Again, very racist towards Joe. He's about to shoot Joe in the back when Kid gets his hands free and shoots the man. Joe is like, wow, you're dumb. You really just saved me again. But now, Kid has a gun and has the upper hand. Or does he? Joe knows that Kid's gun is now empty, and Kid throws a little fit. It's kind of funny because he rarely gets that frustrated. All the while, Hayes is trying to get his hands free. And just as he does, Joe, like a mother catching her toddler, is like, I see you. Cut that shit out. How can he do this to them after they just saved his life twice? Joe says, if it makes him feel better, he'll think of them every time he spends a cent of that $20,000. Hayes appeals to his practical side and reminds him that he shot two white men, and how does he think that's going to go over when they get to Carbondale? Oh, that's a legit concern. It has not escaped Joe, but he's already found a solution. He'll tie up Hayes and Kid real good and take the others down to Carbondale tonight and leave them on the edge of town. Then in the morning, he'll take Hayes and kids to a town called Briartown and turn them in there. I love how he orders Group 2.0 to their feet. He's just like, don't be babies, you're not even hurt that bad, suck it up. While Joe's gone, the boys try in vain to get themselves untied. Kid wonders to Hayes if Joe is really going to turn them in. I mean, yeah, he seems pretty dead set on it. Kid is confident that Hayes will think of something. Hayes is not so confident. Joe rides back and ties them up in more comfortable position. Hayes says all of Carbondale is going to be riding back to get them in the morning. True, but they're not going to Briartown. Joe just said that, so Group 2.0 will lead the town in a different direction. They're going north to Big Butte. Hayes tries again to say that they're not Hayes and Curry. Would Kid Curry and Hannibal Hayes be this stupid? Kid chimes in, and it's funny because they're both, insulting each other to get Joe to believe it. Isn't Kid Curry supposed to be a crack shot? Asks Hayes. And isn't Hayes supposed to be smart? Says Kid. Joe says they have fair points, but even Hannibal Hayes and Kid Curry can have off days. The next day, the trio are off again. Hayes admits to Joe that in spite of everything, he has grown fond of him. Joe returns the sentiment. Then Hayes asks why Joe is so ornery. Why? Hayes, in the last 24 hours, you've seen some of the shit he goes through just by existing, and you ask why? Joe says he doesn't feel he owes white people harm for everything that they did, but he also doesn't owe them anything else either. Any sense of gratitude was taken out of him a long time ago. And Kid says that's a sad way to be. Hey, Kid, shut up. Can you conceive of what a life of slavery is like? No, you can't, and neither can I. So you don't get to tell Joe how to feel about it. Shut up. They keep riding and run across White Group 3.0. This time, Hayes is actually worried for Joe. He says to untie them and make it look like they're riding together as friends and Group 3.0 won't give them any trouble. Joe doesn't go for it. He says white people ain't all bad. Maybe not, but we certainly did create a really fucked up system that benefits us at the expense of people of color. I mean, it is 2023, and have we learned all that much? The leader of Group 3.0, Max, asks why Joe has two white men tied up. Joe once again explains the situation. Max tells two of his guys to untie Hayes and Kid. Joe says they're his prisoners, he has a right to them under the law. Max just tells him to shut up, has the guy lead Hayes and Kids away and on to Big Butte. Then he takes Joe's gun. He asks Joe where he's from, and then he tells him that he doesn't get to arrest white people here or anywhere. That's not his place. This is so gross and tense, it actually makes me a little nauseous. He tells Joe to turn around and head back south where he came from. Joe does turn and starts riding away, but then Max takes out his gun and shoots him in the back. And then he casually says, well, let's go home. Hayes and Kid, now untied, fight off their captors and run back to Joe, who's barely alive. He tells them that they should take off. The boys try and figure out a way to help them, and Joe once again thinks they're idiots for doing so. Kid asks if Joe would have really turned them in. Sure would, he said, and then he dies. In the tag, the guys bury Joe, and Kid asks Hayes if he really does want to tell the sheriff about what happened, and Hayes confirms that yes, he does. Kid reminds him that it would be taking a big chance for them to talk to the law, and Hayes says, sure would. They get on their horses, and Kid asks Hayes if he thinks Joe really would have turned them in. Kid, really, what is it going to take for you to get that yes, he absolutely was going to turn you in? Hayes again says, sure would. The end. Well, shit, that was depressing. As I said at the beginning, I'm not going to give this episode too much credit just for existing, for reasons I already stated, and I stand by that. But, taken in a vacuum, it is a strong episode. Louis Gossett Jr. turns in a great performance, as usual, and Joe is one of the more memorable one-off characters of the series. The show treats him with dignity, he's very clever and determined. There's a couple of lines that struck me as being very written by a white person, like, I'm not nuts about Hayes recognizing the danger with White Group 3.0 and Joe brushing it off, and it does end in tragedy, with violence against a black man, as episodes and movies like this often do, especially back then. I'd like it more if Joe had lived in the end. Gossett Jr. had good chemistry with Pete and Ben, and a lot of the dialogue between them really sparkled. I especially loved Hayes going from being fine with leaving Joe to die to risking his neck by going to the sheriff and telling him about Joe's murder. Now, I doubt this will do anything. I doubt the sheriff would bother arresting White Group 3.0, let alone prosecuting them, but Hayes still wants to try, and I like that. The line of the episode goes to both of them. It's an exchange between Hayes and Kid when they're tied up after Joe leaves with Group 2.0. Kid asks, "The mayor's daughter?" And Hayes replies, "I figured you deserved the best." I thought that was cute and funny. And the episode goes to Kid. Despite what I said about Hayes' arc this episode, I like even more that Kid's first instinct was to save Joe's life. That's the Kid Curry I know and love. Next time on Alias Smith & Jones, an old friend of the boys asks for their help in finding her son and his friend. Also, Jessica Walter is there. Good for her. Research for this podcast comes mainly from the wonderful book Alias Smith & Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men, by Sandra K. Segala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Thanks for listening.